Good morning. Now, this video is going to be a little bit different from most of my other videos. Usually my videos are solely based on the progress I've made in my games, the features I've added, but this video is going to be a little bit different. This video I'm going to dive into something that doesn't always get mainstream attention, but is actually very crucial to developing a successful and engaging game, and that is taking in feedback. Also, stick around to the end for a little update about my game at the end of this video. But before we get into this, we gotta get back to the beginning. First, we gotta understand why taking feedback is so important. When in the early steps of making a game, we have to come up with an idea, and oftentimes we fall in love with the idea. We nurture that little baby of an idea, even if that idea is actually just crap. But we keep loving it because we came up with it ourselves. But making games is a social art. A game that only appeals to the creator isn't a successful game. As a game dev, you can get in your head that your game idea is amazing, like an echo chamber. My game is amazing. Your game is amazing. See, my game is great. With inviting other people into that process, it helps rip off the band-aids and lets you know if your game is a good idea, or just crap that you're trying to dress up. So now you know that your game is at least somewhat of a good idea. So you're good, right? You can finish the game. Well, not necessarily. There's a little known company called Valve, not sure if you've ever heard of them. They've made a couple of small games like Counter-Strike, Team Fortress, and Half-Life. Anyways, they conduct playtests every week. And if a company like Valve, who consistently releases bangers, then it must be somewhat important. Well, once you have the game and are starting playtesters on it, many of the things that you'll find are unexpected results of people playing the game. People will try and play the game in different ways, and it's essential to have people testing it so you can see how those people will play your game. It shows you a perspective that you possibly didn't even consider. Something that is very important is getting the difficulty of a game right. Especially when you're working alone. When you build a game, you tend to get pretty good at it. So things that don't feel challenging to you can feel overly difficult to new players. This is one I've really been trying to hit on my newest Frog game. I can beat the game in minutes, but some of my playtesters took almost half an hour to finish the level. So now we know why getting feedback is important in the first place. So let's dive into how to take this feedback. First, I'm going to split feedback into two groups. There's stated feedback, feedback people actually verbally tell you, and observed feedback, feedback that you just get by watching people play your game. These are two very important types of feedback, and we'll get into observed later in this video, but first, let's talk about stated feedback. This is the most common type of feedback in my opinion. With this type, you can just send your game to people and see what they think without having to stand over their shoulder at every step. So let's cover how to make the most out of this feedback, and the first step is getting a lot of feedback. With a lot of feedback, you can get a ton of different people's perspective and help get a better sense of how a group will take your game. One-off issues with your game aren't that important to fix, essentially if other people don't have problems with that same thing. And with that, you just don't want to fix what ain't broken. Another strategy, and this also applies to a lot of things, is to truly hear what they have to say. Don't brush off any feedback as unuseful and constantly reassure their feedback. Thank them for telling you things that you could change. Don't try and direct their feedback anywhere, and sometimes it's best to just not say anything and just observe what they have to say quietly. Because after all, once the game is released, the developer can't stand over everyone's shoulder helping them play your game. Another issue that I come across a lot is people mentioning things that you have specifically worked on, and there's already a reason for why you did that. It's easy to just explain why you did those changes and brush off that bit of feedback. But this feedback is just as important as all the other pieces of feedback and shouldn't be overlooked. One thing that you should work on before you even show the game to people is trying to get the game into a presentable state. Now, this might seem obvious or redundant, but it's essential. If the game is in a better state, then the playtesters are more likely to say more about what you actually want to hear and less about the bugs and the visual downfalls. Also included with this, if there is a ton of bugs in the game, that is all the playtesters will mention instead of the real gameplay feedback, which you want. Now, let's move on to the other type of feedback that you can get from playtesters: observed feedback. While people are playtesting your game, they'll say a lot to you, and that's really valuable, don't get me wrong. But what I personally have the most fun doing is watching people play my games and take something out of their gameplay without them saying a word. You can watch for patterns in the gameplay, places where all the people act the same or pretty close to the same. You can get an idea of where people are struggling more, because most people don't like to admit when they're struggling or getting frustrated. In my game, around halfway through the level, I introduce a new different obstacle that you have to perform. The obstacle requires you to jump, hit your head on a mushroom, then bounce off another mushroom on the ground to get the height you need for a jump. I thought this was a super fun interaction and a way to push the player. But while watching people play this game, I found that they struggled really hard with this area, harder than I expected them to. This is something that none of my playtesters mentioned verbally, but I noticed it. Almost all of them struggled to line the jump up. And with these observations, I can now know that I need to make something, even if it's just solely visual in the level, to help the player line these jumps up. While watching people play your game, you get a better idea for how people will play your games. I've seen people try and break my game, or people take the riskiest jumps possible. By watching people, you can get better feedback and direction to take your game into. You can better tell their engagement by how long or short they'll play and understand the learning curve of your game. Overall, whether it's verbal or observed, feedback is super important in the process of making a successful game. And I've used it tons in my projects, but always not as much as I should. Now the part that I'm sure you're all waiting for, my little update. After I gave out the game to a bunch of people for them to try out, I had a bit of feedback and a couple of bugs that I needed to fix up. So to try out a couple of different things and get a true comparison to the original version, I made a simple level selector and put a bunch of different changes in separately, so that way I can tell what each change does. I also fixed one major bug that a bunch of my testers ran into, where they would consistently be stuck bouncing against the ceiling. So I remedied that by detecting if the player was moving side to side, and if not, adding a force in a random direction. It worked pretty well. With this, I had a couple people out and I compiled my favorite changes into one build. After this level of feedback, I think I'm ready to move on and start working on other parts of this game. Thanks for sticking around. I'm sorry that my videos have been kind of different lately, but even after the holidays, I've just been super busy. So thanks for sticking around. If you liked this video, then like and subscribe. If you didn't, don't. Or whatever. I'm not your mom. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.